Right, 06. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2025 Wheelwright Lecture in Political Economy. My name is Gareth Bryant, and I'm the current chair of the discipline of Political Economy here. I'll start by acknowledging that we are on stolen Aboriginal land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Sovereignty over this land was never ceded, and I pay my respects to Gadigal elders past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Today's Wheelwright Lecture is part of a series of celebrations marking the 50th anniversary of political economy at the University of Sydney. The political economy program here was established in 1975 in response to a student campaign that was one of many significant social movements that were happening at the time. Most importantly, the movement for Indigenous land rights. So 50 years on, it's a good time for us to recommit to the central place of Indigenous justice, self-determination and sovereignty in the political economy movement. So as a first order of business, I'm pleased to say that we have Uncle Alan Murray here tonight, chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who is going to deliver a formal welcome to country. So thanks, Alan.
Many thanks, Gareth. How are you? How was the travelling in, coming in here under the weather, under the sky? In our culture, our creator, Biami, he cries for us when it rains like this and we have lots of clouds. So because we have many Aboriginal deaths in our community, not one or two, it's in the 3s and 4s and 5s. And if you come through the bloodlines, you understand our relationship to the land. Myself, my name's Alan Murray. I'm the chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Land Council. I've been living in Sydney all my life. My parents were stolen generation, particularly my father. He came from Cumbragunja Mission between Echuca and Shepparton, down there in Victoria. But Cumbragunja was actually on the New South Wales side. Aboriginal villages or missions were out of sight and out of mind. They took our children away, but they cast us off, put us in villages across New South Wales. The largest mission was Warraginsa in the middle of New South Wales, near Darlington Point. And from the get-go, from the tall ships coming through Sydney Harbour, we've seen a lot of movement of Aboriginal people here in Gadigal land, particularly on the north side, the southern side and the western here in Sydney. And the bulk of the troublesome is that we've had 29 clans that make up the Eora Nation. Each clan had between 50 and 1,000 clan members living in pockets. From here to Bondi, to the way to the Blue Mountain, there were 29 clans. So you sort of imagine the population would have been in the close of over 5,000 people. Only the two clans that remain today are the Gadigal people and the Bidjigal people of La Perouse. These are the two clans that can claim their heritage. Before them, tall ships came through Sydney Harbour. Imagine that, only two clans. If Aboriginal people were intact and they weren't colonised the way they were colonised, our population would be something like today's estimates, around about 13 million, half the 26 million. That means we would have been 50% of the Australian population compared to that. These are my estimates, but I've been talking to a lot of scholars about that. Just thinking about the enormity of warfare that took place against us because we were defending our land. And I thank you, Gareth, for those kind words about sovereignty. We never gave up this land and we never will. But also it means that, like your heading is that do institutions like this look after First Nations people? My answer is no. It has to be no, because we don't see it. We don't value it. We can't value because we don't know what your reciprocity is going to be like. We've got a long way to go before we have a truthful dialogue. But a welcome to country is about celebrating who we are. Don't listen to the shock jocks. Don't listen to Sky News. Don't listen to the idiot Aboriginal people like, I'm not going to say their name. You do not have to listen to them. They don't have to. Imagine that one person in the last 24 hours was picking on another cohort of people. Don't know. These are the points. Imagine that, and I'll go back to the referendum, and I'll say this: 55% of Australians voted against us. We don't want them. 45% of Australians did, and that's 6.5 million of Australians voted for us. Thank you very much. And it means a lot that we can, I think I said that last time, got a bit of a clap on it. Like, I always think as I'm getting older, my worry is this: our kids are being targeted. We've been marginalised. We can't go to a shop without being videoed or spoken to. For some reason, for the past couple of years, our heads have been lowered. It's like the reconditioning's come back. And for our Aboriginal people to look at us at an Australian, we don't look, we observe, and we turn our heads away. We're starting to get back to that conditioning. And that's the white Australian conditioning about assimilation. We're going back to that taunt. But a welcome to country is about coming to the land, respecting the land, showing your understanding and your commitment. And wherever you go, you're walking on Aboriginal land. But remember this, that the Gadigal people are proud people. My people, on my father's side, we are the warring people. They're the Wiradjuri people. And the Gamilaroi people, that's my mother's country, where we talk about also warring and taking possession. So with that, have a great evening. And I'll say this, and I get the privilege and the pleasure in saying this: always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uncle Alan. So next, I would like to introduce you to Professor Azrini Wahidin, who is the head of the School of Social and Political Sciences, which the political economy discipline is part of. Professor Wahidin will welcome everyone to the school and talk a little bit about the Wheelwright lecture.
Thank you, Gareth. As Gareth said, I'm Azrini Wahidin, Head of School for the School of Social and Political Sciences. And I would like to thank Uncle Alan from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council for the welcome to country. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is with great pleasure to welcome you all to the 18th Wheelwright Lecture, hosted by the School of Social and Political Sciences. SSPS, as it's known, covers 4 research and teaching renowned disciplines: political economy, anthropology, government and international relations, sociology and criminology. The Wheelwright Lecture is particularly special because it is the first of a series of events that is celebrating the 50th anniversary of political economy at the University of Sydney. We are here to honour Ted Wheelwright, born in 1921 and who sadly passed away in 2007 at the age of 86. He's one of the founders of political economy at the University of Sydney, teaching generations of students between 1952 and 1986. As a researcher, he was renowned for his pioneering work on the dynamics of corporate globalisation and its dangers for environmental sustainability, economic inequality, and democratic legitimacy. He has been described by many as a giant mind with a mind to match. The Wheelwright Lecture, now in its 18th year, commemorates Ted's life and celebrates the way his legacy lives on in the discipline of political economy at the University of Sydney and beyond. I am delighted and honoured to celebrate this evening with you and welcome tonight's distinguished speaker, a former student, member of staff, and a leading feminist sociologist who has shaped many of us in this room in the way we think, the way we write, and the way we see the world. Emerita Raewyn Connell. Professor Connell has made an outstanding contribution to academic life, both in Australia and beyond. Drawing on a most recent book, The Good University, What Universities Actually Do and Why It's Time for Radical Change, which I have here, Professor Connell will speak on the political economy of universities. She will explore how they have changed over time, what role they play in our contemporary economy and society, and the future of universities as the HE landscape is being reimagined. You will be able to buy this wonderful book, which I've read, at the end of the lecture tonight. Professor Connell joins an illustrious list of former speakers, including Eric Wright, Susan George, and Adam Toombs, to name a few. So it is with the greatest of pleasure that I hand you over to Dr. Gareth Bryant, who will introduce our formidable speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wahidin. So I'm going to continue the introduction because there is so much to say about our wonderful speaker tonight, Raewyn Connell. So Raewyn is Professor Emerita at University of Sydney and also a life member of the National Tertiary Education Union. She's she's a pioneering, or as she described herself in the bio she sent to us, notorious sociologist who's been at the forefront of international research on gender relations, ruling classes, masculinities, schools, sexuality, social justice, and the global economy of knowledge over the course of a 50-year plus academic career that maps on almost exactly to the timeline of political economy at Sydney. So Raewyn became Foundation Professor of Sociology at Macquarie University in 1976, worked at the University of California, Santa Cruz in the 90s, and then was appointed University Chair in Education at the University of Sydney, a position she held until she retired in 2014. Raewyn's many agenda-defining books, including Southern Theory, Masculinities, Gender and Power, Making the Difference, and Ruling Class, Ruling Culture, can be found on the reading lists across our political economy curriculum. Indeed, Class Structure in Australian History, co-authored with Terry Irving, is one of the core texts in our popular History of Australian Capitalism unit. It's hard to overstate and indeed summarise the enormous impact of Raewyn's scholarship and teaching, which, for example, led her to become an advisor to the United Nations and their initiatives on gender equality and peacemaking. For those that are interested in learning a little bit more about Raewyn, I recommend taking a look at Matt Wade's fantastic Lunch With feature, which featured Raewyn, and that was published in the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday on their website. The reason we thought Raewyn would be the perfect speaker for our 50th anniversary edition of the Wheelwright was because in a time of crisis for the university sector, she's been putting her attention in recent years to the question of universities and higher education. And her thoughts on this issue are best laid out in the book, The Good University, and there's copies of that available just outside the foyer after this lecture. This is a piece of work that is deeply embedded in the cooperative labour and collective struggles of the staff and students that constitute the university, and works with, I think, a wonderfully political economic understanding of a university as, I quote, not really the bricks and mortar, nor the figures in university balance sheets, but the vast intangible asset of organised knowledge. As Raewyn concludes in the book, this is a powerful resource that can be exploited, distorted, and disrupted, or remade as part of a creative, inclusive, and democratic future. So tonight, Raewyn will survey these diverging options, which seem particularly acute in the current situation, in a talk provocatively titled, "Should We Abolish Universities?" So please join me in welcoming our 2025 Wheelwright speaker, Emerita Professor Raewyn Connell.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out tonight too. Impressive weather conditions. I'm very glad to be here. It's now 10 years, somewhat over 10 years that I've been on the retired list, but unable to actually stop working even when the pay went down. What I'm hoping to do is indeed partly based on the arguments in the Good University, which itself was partly based on industrial experience and struggles at this university, but also trying to take a somewhat wider perspective, a wider global perspective on universities and higher education sectors. In brief, what I'm going to do is start out by talking about the state of play and the character of criticism of universities in the current state of play. Then I want to try and look a little bit below the surface to what it is about contemporary universities that is the source of all the mischief, at least giving rise to significant parts of the problems we're all facing. And finally, think about possible futures. That's my line of march. Can I try and see if this now works? Okay, yeah, that's me and where you can find my stuff. So I want to start out by simply recognizing that there's trouble at the mill, that universities in many parts of the world are currently in a state of serious trouble, and not least, of course, in Australia. If you think, go down Parramatta Road, Broadway, and visit UTS, where some, I think, 400 jobs at the moment are under threat from management restructuring. Go to my alma mater, University of Melbourne, and you find they have just proposed to abolish Australia's premier literary journal, Meanjin, on the grounds of the financial costs. The terrible financial costs of running Meanjin mainly consist of 2 part-time staff members. Really serious burden, that one. Go to Canberra and you'll see, well, I don't know what you see at the Australian National University at the moment, but it's pretty frightening, and includes cutting the ground away from other national treasures such as the Australian Dictionary of Biography, which is mainly run on voluntary labour from retired academics, I'm proud to say. Okay, so there's trouble around, as we all know, but it's not just now that it's been noticed. There is a considerable literature of critique and evaluation of universities in different parts of the world. Over the last 30 years or so, there's been something of a chorus of critique of what was happening to universities. Here's one of the early publications on it. This is Australian. Ian Lowe, I think, was a professor of chemistry at Queensland. And this came out in 1994. which is not all that long after the Dawkins reforms began, it was the troubling consequences were already visible at that time. And since then, we've had a multiplicity of critiques, basically. And I'll give you just a few of the titles of books, critical books about universities that come out quite recently. Okay, The Abandoned Mission in Public Higher Education, Selling Students Short, Bullshit Towers, and the latest one to come out is called very simply Broken. So one would deduce that the colleagues were a little worried about what is going on. I don't want to dwell on the critical literature. I've written some of it too. Those who know the book will be aware of my take on managerialism. I want to try and summarize the leading themes because there's a lot of overlap between the arguments in the critical publications. First of them concerns the rise of management power, the growth of a layer, a stratum, if you like, of professional managers in contemporary universities who have gained power over principal decisions that are made in universities and have also seen a quite startling rise in their incomes happening at the same time. This is part of a larger shift in which universities have been pushed often by state policy as well as the use of people within universities towards the model of the profit-making corporation as the model of reshaping the institution. And with that, of course, has come increasing, indeed relentless attention to questions of profit and loss in the university's operations. Simultaneously with this, changes have developed in the situation of the staff of the university, a decline in security, academic tenure is pretty well worldwide, increased casualization of the teaching staff, increased outsourcing of the non-academic staff, non-academic work, and an increase in the surveillance, the pressure of goals and performance, which has made the experience of working in universities noticeably more stressful than it used to be. I'm by no means one of the people who argue that there was a kind of golden age of universities. When I began my university career, I was part of a kind of movement against the control of universities by senior professors. There was a case for democratization then, as there is now, although the shape of the struggle has certainly changed. The situation of students has also changed over this time, of course, with the introduction and the increase of fees, the growth of class sizes, the greater social distance between staff and students, the narrowing of curriculum possibilities, which often accompanies restructures. This too has made the university experience more problematic as time has gone on. And finally, an important theme in the critical literature, which I think is important for us to think about, has been some loss of what we might think of as the cultural centrality of universities or the authority in the wider culture which universities at various times have held. We see some of that happening through decisions such as the decision to defund the engine is a perfect example of that. There is, of course, a much wider set of issues around denialism, around the political critique, the rejection of organised knowledge, and the whole set of policies which have, so to speak, redefined the higher education sector away from regarding it as a kind of a collective cultural asset to redefine, to regarding it essentially as a set of competing firms engaged in selling high-level vocational education. So those, I think, are the principal themes that you'll find in the critical literature. I broadly agree with them. There's some, I have some criticisms of some of the ways these criticisms have been formulated. Most of the critiques have been written by academics, and strange to tell, they tend to emphasize the troubles of academics and de-emphasize what has been happening to the non-academic staff, which to me is equally important. But apart from some criticism of that kind, I largely agree with these lines of criticism and the account of the changes that have come over the sector in the last generation or so. I also agree with the anxiety that's shown in the titles of the books that I was reading out. Things can get worse. There's no guarantee that the kinds of shifts and the pressures that have resulted from them are ending now. Indeed, we might say, just thinking about my title, I will come to a somewhat more serious discussion of abolitionism later on. But there is a kind of abolition, or perhaps better phrased, a kind of piecemeal demolition of universities that is going on through management-driven restructures or policy-driven shifts in universities' offerings and indeed viability. The sackings, the widespread sackings, the designation of some staff as deadwood, and we're better without, the closures of programs, this kind of thing really has no obvious limit to it. The NTEU currently estimates, I believe the state branch estimates, that there are 1,800 university jobs at risk in current restructurings in New South Wales alone. And there's no reason, no logical reason why that couldn't increase next year. So there is a kind of demolition which is ongoing and is happening without very much power on the part of those affected to stop or reshape process of reorganisation. But of course, it's not just the managers within the university sector who have been doing damage to universities recently. Our country party, I still can't call them nationals, Liberal coalition has been niggling away at it for a while. In power, of course, they began to second guess the ARC and cut out research grants for research projects they regarded as suspicious. In other parts of the world, the equivalent political parties have been very much nastier. than our coalition, even in the last coalition government. In Florida, for instance, I don't know if any of you have been following the events there closely, but the DeSantis regime, he's the governor, has been addressing public universities in Florida, basically in the form of a purge. A couple of years ago, they took over control of public liberal arts college there, began to push out all staff whom they regarded as liberals. They've also taken over the agency which controls the statewide public university system, installed the governor's mates in that agency, and are now beginning to purge the curriculum and change the management of the other universities in the public system. So we're seeing a pretty well full-blown offensive to shift one significant state university system and turn it essentially into an agency of the Conservative Party in local power. Then, of course, we come to regimes such as the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which has abolished universities for 50% of the population now, and abolished most secondary education for girls as well, so that girls no longer will be able to qualify for entry, even if they were allowed in. And then, of course, we have what's going on in Gaza, where the university sector is being demolished for 100% of the population. There were 7 universities in Gaza. All of them have been destroyed. This is the remains of the Islamic University of Gaza now. I will come back to that issue later on. Okay, well, listening to the lines of criticism, which are now spread through very significant literature, looking at the industrial situation, the level of conflict that's arisen in university systems, looking at the attacks on universities from outside powers, you might think that the global university system was in crisis, and you would be wrong. In fact, it's never been doing better. This year, according to UNESCO figures, there are 264 million students in higher education worldwide. That's the most there have ever been, and it has been rising through the last couple of decades, not falling. Similarly, if you look at the statistics of research output, there are now some 5 million refereed articles published in academic journals worldwide. Again, that has risen through recent years. It's never been as high as that before. Where do they get all the peer reviewers from? I'm not quite sure, but I guess Elon Musk will soon work out how to do it by artificial intelligence and post the results on X. Okay, so, you know, the university system is globally has kept growing, and at least in some respects, it seems to be a scene of great prosperity. There's a long history, of course, leading up to this. The universities, or at least European-style universities, began to spread to other parts of the world back in the 16th century, as long ago as that. The first colonial universities were founded in the Western Hemisphere. And they have grown, the number of universities around the world has grown. In fact, parallel with the growth of so-called modern science, or the research-based knowledge formation, which is the basis of university curricula globally now. So now we have a worldwide system with a certain degree of standardization in it, in terms of curriculum, concept of knowledge, methodology of teaching, and so forth. The managerial university, I love this picture of it. It was an architect's drawing before it was built. You will recognize the building. I just love the stormy clouds overhead and the fire growing up in the west behind. Something like that has now gone around the world. And of course, as the numbers have grown, as the size of the sector has grown, the managers take the credit. Indeed, the managers now call themselves the university in enterprise bargaining. I noticed that beginning some years back. Didn't think of it at the time as having any cultural significance, but then the Australian Vice-Chancellor's Committee renamed itself Universities Australia. And you began to see that perhaps the managers really did begin to think that they were the university, or everything that was really important happened in university was happening as a result of the managers. Now, that's maybe not entirely a mistaken idea either. And the managers collectively, not thinking of particular individuals here, but the managers as a group, their position in the universities are buttressed by a kind of coalition. This is me as the former political scientist beginning to think politically about management through state elites who find a managerial university performing roles that they want to have performed. This coalition also includes parts of the corporate elite. You can see some of this on university councils as they are now. The coalition includes finance firms. As universities have become more like conventional corporations, they become more integrated with the finance sector, funding loans, deficits, and so forth. The corporations who are, if you like, the suppliers for the operations of the corporate university can be represented there. The very rich families who are known in university jargon now as donors or philanthropists. And then, of course, the predators, such as KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and their friends. Now, it's worth thinking about this coalition of support, if you like, for contemporary university managers in social terms too, because there is a kind of social formation of the contemporary ruling class. And the way management has evolved in Australia over the last 30 years, understandably, senior managers have come to resemble other members of that class increasingly. And that, I think, gives you an angle on the astonishing rise of the Vice-Chancellor's salaries, or more exactly packages. Australia's heads, the university heads, are very highly paid by world standards, I might say, including the standards of the United States. But within the context of that coalition of, or that social milieu, if you like, from which the supportive coalition emerges, salaries of the level that the Vice-Chancellors are now paid do make sense. They're a sign of respectability in those circles, a sign of the prosperity of the enterprises that these people are representing. And it's the visible membership, if you like, of the current ruling class that I think makes a certain amount of sense where, from the point of view of university, the wider university workforce, these salaries are just deeply offensive. Okay, so there's prosperity, there's growth, but there's also, you know, a whole set of toxic consequences that have gone along with it, the particular form of growth. And I now want to offer a line of thought about this contradictory situation, what some of the contradictions actually are. Because I think the troubles that the sector has are not principally due to having, you know, individual evildoers at the top. There are structural problems here that allow the same sector to be both so prosperous and so messed up. At this point, I should offer a theory warning. There will be a few elements of sociological theory in what I'm going to offer in the next 10 minutes. The first contradiction, it seems to me, is about the institutional form. If we look seriously into the labour process of teaching at advanced levels and the labour process of research, and those are things I try to do in the first 2 chapters of The Good University, if you'll forgive me, the advertisement. I think you will agree that the successful prosecution of those tasks requires both intense cooperation among a variety of workers and a constant input of creativity and improvisation. That the daily labour, the everyday work of university staff involves quite strikingly cooperation and creativity. We can talk about that later if you would like to go into that in more detail. But, and it's a very big but, the corporate form, or the kind of hybrid corporate and state agency form that universities have now taken, requires command relationships, requires functioning hierarchy in which control is exercised from outside the frontline workforce in ways that constantly disrupt or constrain those qualities of cooperation, creativity, and improvisation which actually make the university work or work well. And that contradiction, I think, between form and the nature of the actual labour of universities is, I think, an important source of the distrust between managers and rank and file staff, which is so striking in universities now. It's one of the things that drives the level of surveillance that drives everyone crazy. It's one of the things that becomes visible in organisational restructures, which are constantly disruptive, and a source of the larger level of alienation, I think, among university workers. The second contradiction, I mean, these are certainly not fundamentally separate. I mean, they're all related, but for purposes of exposition, I'll treat them second. Second one concerns what we might call the economic process within universities. Producing the main effect, let's say the main effects that we're trying to produce in a university are, I think, 2 principally: advanced learning among the students, advanced levels of learning in the students, and in the case of research, the development of a particular field of knowledge, whatever it may be, the advance of knowledge, at least in in that particular specialty. And producing those effects, those main effects of university work, requires, I would argue, collaboration across the whole workforce. It's not something that you can say is caused by individuals or even an identifiable section of the university workforce. It is a collective effect across the workforce as a whole. But the benefits of the university's activities are very unequally distributed, and more unequally distributed now than they used to be. And those benefits include, of course, salaries. They include respect. They include security, well-being, and job satisfaction. Now, at this point, I have in mind the work of a German sociologist, Klaus Offer, and some of you may know, who back in the 1960s came up with what I think was one of the most important insights in sociology of organizations. When you're looking at large-scale production processes in large corporations or in the public sector too, where there are marked divisions of labour, but also a close collaboration between different groups of workers, there is no rational way to assign different levels of importance to the work of particular groups. So there is no rational way of devising a system of unequal benefits, wages or intangible benefits. And because there's no rational way, those decisions are made partly by tradition, in terms of levels of occupational pay, but more importantly by organisational power, who in fact controls the organisation. And that, I think, is also connected with the integration of university management into a corporate ruling class, where the exercise of organisational power and the extraction of unequal benefits is simply everyday practice. It's just normal life. The third contradiction I want to point to is around what we might think of as the cultural project of the universities. I argue in the book, and I will defend to my dying day, the idea that the cultural project of universities, more than anything else, is the establishment of truth and the conveying of truth to people who need or can use it. Now, I know that truth is a fighting word among philosophers, and if you don't like that term, I'd be happy if you'll go with, as a definition of the university's cultural project, deep insight and accurate knowledge, something like that. I call it truth. Now, the problem is that the reshaping of universities on a corporate model in the context of policy settings where the universities become firms that are not only expected, but are actually forced to compete with each other, that works against the underlying cultural project of universities, because the search for corporate advantage constantly requires lying, distortion, the misrepresentation, the concealment of truth, and other things that are simply incompatible with the cultural agenda that I was suggesting is central to universities' tasks. And we could go through examples of that, and I point out some in the book. University advertising, for instance. Where's my clicker? Okay. I'm a graduate of the University of Melbourne, so I'm entitled to insult it. This is a lie. And everybody knows it's a lie. I mean, these spurious ranking systems, everyone knows how dodgy they are. And yet universities keep doing this kind of thing. And the companies, the commercial enterprises which produce the rankings, know that there's a great market for this among university managers. So they keep multiplying scales in which practically any university management can find a scale on which they do relatively well. And then that will appear in the advertising, right? Okay. If you're looking for something to encourage distrust or disillusionment with universities, I think university advertising would be high on the list. It really would. But there's more to it, of course, too. Many universities become complicit with paywalls, with patenting, with the whole intellectual property racket. There are echoing silences from universities about things that ought to be public knowledge. Think of all the wage theft scandals that have been going on in this country recently, and retirement agreements with people who are restructured out, who, in order to get the golden handshake, have to sign a legally enforceable declaration that they won't let on what's been going on in this joint. The double speaking that is now comes from university management. Think of what's been going on at the Australian National University and the kinds of pronouncements that have come out of management there, and so on. So there's something deeply problematic, I think, about the way universities have been. I mean, they have, of course, been pushed by policy. Managers say we have to do this, and in a way, they're right. So it's not just an individual decision on the part of managers, but the whole regime that has been set up are involved in producing the tensions and incoherencies and alienation that the critics have rightly identified. Okay, so let's come to the sometimes happier topic of futures. And I come back now to my title, Should We Abolish Universities? Everybody here, I guess, is familiar with some contemporary abolitionist movements, the abolition of police, the movement for the abolition of police, a movement for the abolition of prisons, both movements emphasizing the deep-seated racism and violence of police forces and prison systems. There is, of course, a very long-standing socialist agenda of abolishing armies as a necessary step in achieving peace. It's not surprising, therefore, that some people have come to the idea that maybe the troubles of universities are so fundamental that we should abolish them too. A case of exactly this kind is made by Stefano Harvey and Fred Moten in the United States in a paper that they published in 2004 and then developed into this book in 2013. You can find this online if you're interested in following it up. I won't go through their argument in any detail. Basically, they think the universities have become fundamentally corrupt. But they don't offer a practical program for replacing universities. Rather, they argue that the case for abolition of universities is really part of an argument that we need a whole new social order in which doing without universities would become credible. Well, I sympathize with that, and I think it's a very interesting read. But I think we also do need to talk concretely about what we do in practical terms come Monday morning. And how do we then, where do we go to ground, if you like, an argument about what to do with universities? Well, I think part of that, we must look to what excluded groups are saying, following the principle of the definition of justice as prioritizing the interests of the least advantaged. In relation to universities, the least advantaged would surely be those groups who are currently excluded effectively from university life. I was reading a little while ago a document put out by the three presidents of the universities in Gaza, which were public universities, not profit-making universities. And they were lamenting, of course, the destruction of their campuses, but they insisted that higher education was still going on under grave difficulties in Gaza, and I'm sure they're right, and that a reconstruction of the university system in Gaza was profoundly important for the future of the Palestinian people. And again, I'm sure they're right there. If we go to the other case of mass exclusion that I mentioned, the situation of women in Afghanistan, we do actually have an expression of desire from exactly that group, because for 20 years, Afghani universities were open to women between the first Taliban regime and the new one. And in those 20 years, the number of women enrolling in universities multiplied 20 times over. That's the strength of demand that can be found in an excluded group in practical terms. So it seems to me that on those kinds of indications, and I guess one could do a proper bit of research and find many more, it doesn't seem to me a serious proposition to say, okay, we should abolish universities now, given that the indications are that even imperfect universities are still desired by very important numbers. So what's to abolish in my argument would be the current form that universities have taken, that hybrid state / corporate form that I was talking about before. And if we're going to argue that the current form, the current organization of universities needs to be abolished and something else put in its place, it's up to us to say something of what should be put in its place. And there are two levels of this. I think one is we can ask what reforms are credible now, what could be done, not exactly next Monday, but at least started next Monday. What's our current to-do list? Well, here's mine. I start by electing vice-chancellors, deans and councils. A little bit of industrial democracy never went astray. I would set about reducing the wage differentials in universities, salary inequalities. Lower the Gini index would be my slogan. And I would start reducing, obviously, the number of casual and the number of outsourced workers who make the university work. Next, I would both reduce student fees and nominate a date for abolition. I tried, and this would be a big negotiating task, but one that one could start pretty well straight away, negotiating a collective higher education guarantee, not a voucher system, but a social agreement on the level of funding for higher education and research that the public sector in Australia would maintain. And I would do things like eliminating the almost obscene levels of competitiveness and wasted labour that we see in the research funding system now, where something is about 1 in 5 of ARC and NH and MRC applications actually gets funded. So 4/5 of the labour, and it's a lot of labour putting in for those things, is wasted. There are other ways of funding research. You're making much more use of block grants for research that are possible. And then finally, you'll see I'm working through the 3 main contradictions that I talked about, around the organisational form, the economic process, and the cultural mission of universities. I would ban advertising. I would ban league tables. And if KPMG was seen on campus, I would go and let down their tires, basically. Secondly, I think we should revive university extension programs, not as money-making short-term little qualifications, but as ways of engaging with social groups who are underrepresented in the mainstream student, in the existing student body, partly because they are the people that universities most need to learn about, learn from, in designing a comprehensive higher education system for the future. And finally, we do need to decolonise the universities. And one of the very practical steps there is to reinvigorate university language teaching. I think it's as simple as that. We really need much more language teaching than we currently have. Okay, that's my short-term agenda. If you like, I'll send it off to Canberra and see how I do. But all of them, I am very, very conscious. All of them depend on organising, and organising not just in a responsive, in terms of response of protest, but organising for power, organising to actually achieve a democratisation of the organisations. And now you'll be pleased to know I'm coming to the end of my statements, and I want to finish with a little bit of blue sky thinking, or some blue sky thinking that's some of it that has already happened. I don't have a blueprint for the university of the future. I think there'll probably be lots and lots of different blueprints, and that will be all to the good. But I do want to emphasize that we do have experience in other forms of universities. There is a rich history of universities which is not very well known, which includes a lot of radical and progressive universities and colleges. There have been underground universities. There have been free university movement, which we had in Sydney in the 1960s too. There are indigenous universities in various parts of the world. There are labour colleges, or there have been labour colleges. There have been radical departments in a great many universities. There is a rich history of alternative agendas and practices within the history of higher education. So political economy, whose 50th birthday we are celebrating, is part of a grand tradition here. And I'm very happy to celebrate that. Which brings me to Ted Wheelwright. Ted, whom I knew slightly, and was one of the first people to do serious, solid research on Australian capitalism, someone who kept socialist ideas alive in this university in the depths of the Cold War. And when new generations arrived, finally saw some of his ideas getting recognised and celebrated. Ted was a cheerful and optimistic person, and I also want to be a little bit cheerful now in telling you a few examples of university and college projects that we can draw inspiration from. This is the Bolivarian University of Venezuela, started in 2003, still going. When Hugo Chavez came to power, one of his purposes in the late 1990s was to expand the availability of higher education to working class and peasant and tribal communities in Venezuela. And the principal way this was undertaken was by founding a new university which would operate in a decentralized way. They set up, in fact, 1,800 classrooms in villages and working class suburbs. That's an example of the kind of area that they set up in, which was intended to create local centres of higher education, providing books, providing meals, which is a relevant thing with poor population, to students, reworking the curriculum to try to make it relevant to local community concerns, reworking the pedagogy to eliminate the social distance, if you like, between teachers and students. Well, it's not been an easy run for them. They were opposed by the existing university system. There's, as you'll know if you follow any of the news from Venezuela, the regime has become authoritarian. The level of social conflict there is quite severe. So understandably, the new university has struggled. But it strikes me as a really remarkable attempt to deal in some practical way with what is one of the fundamental problems of university systems worldwide, and that is the social inequalities of recruitment of students into higher education. So that's one example of people who've tried to make something really different. Going back a generation or so before, a couple of generations in fact, I want to come to the Highlander Folk School, much smaller enterprise, set up, opened in 1932 in Appalachia, in the poor rural area of the United States, with the idea, it was originally, I think, founded by Christian philanthropy to try to set up a possibility for poor communities to come together, reflect, find their strengths, develop ideas, learn, and use their own strengths to change their situation. That was, I think, the original idea. During the 1930s, Highlander connected with another group which was organising in the southern states. That was the CIO, Council of Industrial Organisations, the left-wing Union Confederation, which at that time was launching a great organising project across many industries in the southern states. And Highlander became a kind of centre with the CIO for developing the activist workforce for those projects. And naturally enough, began to come under intense pressure from the local ruling class, the effectively apartheid regime in those states. By the end of the Second World War, the alliance with the CIO was weakening as McCarthyism gained a grip in the United States, and the unions were generally weakened or made more conservative. But Highlander then found a second wind, so to speak, in relation to the civil rights movement, and became an important organising centre for the civil rights movement in the southern states. And this is a photograph of one of the groups meeting on the Highlander campus, the building you saw before in the background, in the days of the civil rights movement. That also attracted fierce opposition from the political establishment there, who controlled the local legislature and eventually managed by legal manoeuvres to shut Highlander down in 1961. But in those couple, 2-3 decades, it had produced really a remarkable model of movement-oriented higher education, from which I think we can learn a great deal. And it's not dead, although the original organisation was shut down by the local power holders. A cultural project continued and still exists, in fact, carrying forward to now. Finally, I want to go back even further than that, to 1921 in Bengal. Rabindranath Tagore, the poet, public intellectual, novelist, set up a local school system and decided it needed a higher education top. And the available higher education in India at the time, of course, was run by the British government, the British Raj, who had set up a university system. In fact, began almost exactly at the same time as the British set up this university. They were setting up the first 3 colonial universities in India. But those universities, of course, had a British design curriculum, a Eurocentric curriculum as well. Now think of it. And Tagore wanted something different. If he was setting up a higher education institution, he wanted something that drew on local culture, local knowledge systems, right? But that wasn't enough for him either. He wanted to be able to draw on other civilizations, as he called them, other parts of Asia, China, Tibet, so forth, and thus created his college as a what he called a meeting place of civilizations. This is the opening ceremony. I love it, under a tree. And that what you're looking at there, I think, could be regarded as the first attempt to create a multicultural world university. And it was done outside without any state funding, without the regime supporting it. That too still exists. It became part of the Indian university system after independence, and you'll still find it there. I think it's very different now from what it was under the trees, but nevertheless, that's something also which had a long-term tremendous effect. Okay, folks, that's my argument and my examples from which I've drawn inspiration. I hope other people can too. I've been hanging around universities for about 60 years, and coming to the end of that, I have no regrets about spending so much of my time with universities. Like some of my colleagues and friends, I would prefer that we were handing them on to the younger generation in better shape. But there are things to be done about that. So my in speaking to the younger people present, I would simply offer as a pithy piece of advice: be realistic and be bold. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raewyn, for that really outstanding lecture. We are going to follow our Wheelwright tradition now and invite some younger generations up on stage to ask questions. So we're just going to set up some chairs for them. So if Jada, Cindy, Marley, and Ruby could come down and take a seat, that would be wonderful. Raewyn, would you be able to? I think we'll have a seat for you front there as well. Thank you. Right there. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, so it looks like Ruby has the microphone. So Ruby's one of our third-year political economy students. So would you like to get us started and ask a question? I'm not sure. Does it sound like it's working? That sounds like it's working, yeah.
So I guess thank you so much for that lecture. It was, I think, very refreshing to feel understood somewhat in how I am perceived in the university in my own experience. So thank you for that. As you say, it can be very misleading and gaslighting sometimes in all of the advertising. So my question is around, I guess, how do you understand the university's role? And I'm really curious to understand your perspective on this, because you talk about it as being a kind of vessel for truth, but I don't think it's controversial in understanding how education has always been a ruling class mechanism for hegemonic narratives and reproducing a compatible left, particularly. And so I'm wondering in what ways perhaps that is no longer needed by the ruling class. It is no longer trying to quell, May 68 uprisings and critical theory in the same way. So I'm wondering if it is maybe that 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 is not what it is trying to reproduce, and why we're losing all of that. Thank you.
Sorry, suddenly run out of words. I think the ruling, the process of establishing hegemony, which I suppose would be my language for thinking about the role of class power in cultural institutions like universities, is rarely a simple matter of top-down control, of, if you like, simple propaganda, or simply being able to control the circulation of ideas and information. I always think we have to look for the tensions and contradictions in the process, which I was trying to do a little bit in my rather rhetorical remarks about truth and lies. But there are counter pressures, and there are also divisions within classes, for instance, within the ruling class. In fact, we see that rather spectacularly in the United States at the moment. I think that there is part of the American ruling class, which is integrated with places like Columbia and Harvard and Berkeley and so forth, feels they're doing a useful job and help the class itself is partly reproduced through our universities and so forth. But there's another part, and to some extent we can identify that with the fossil fuel industries and their political representatives, some of the new the tech bros, the Silicon Valley crew, who, whatever their ultimate dependence on university and research-based knowledge, which of course the computer industry is based on, nevertheless don't have the same relationship to universities and are in fact able to treat the universities as a target for populist aggression. And so you get the kind of thing I was talking about in Florida, for instance, which is very much directed towards trying to consolidate the Republican, that is the local ruling class, consolidate their power through populist agitation, in effect. And they don't really, it seems, at any rate, they don't really care what happens to higher education while that's provided they achieve their short-term goals. So I'd always feel, therefore, for the tensions and contradictions in the situation.
Thank you. Over to you, Cindy, one of our master's students.
Thank you, Professor, for giving us the thoughtful lecture. So my question is about the university finance and the learning opportunities. So as a Chinese student, I'd like to share my experience of attending Chinese university. In China, it is very rare for a student to receive a university offer but could not afford the tuition. Even in the poorest regions, student loans are almost interest-free. So our annual tuition often reach from $700 to $1,400 US, and dormitory are very cheap. As an example, in 2023, the Chinese government invested about 2,500 trillion US in higher education. All of the 3,000 public universities operate on a non-profit basis. So my question is that, could the Chinese model be applied or adapted in the Western country like American or Australia, which the student tuition is very high, especially for the international students. Thank you.
Yes, you're right to point to the remarkable character of Chinese policy. Recently, the regime has been investing big money in higher education and research. Research, of course, involving research institutes as well as universities, but a great deal of it comes out of universities too. And among the remarkable statistics of the last couple of years is that the output of Chinese researchers in terms of published papers in refereed journals, I think in the last 2 years, has just exceeded the total output of American researchers. It is, of course, relatively concentrated in particular areas where the government has actually been investing heavily. Biomedical science, for instance, engineering sciences. So I don't think we see quite the same effect in the social sciences. But it certainly is a dramatic demonstration of how a government with the will to do something dramatic in higher education can do it. Now, what divisions there might be within the regime, within the Communist Party leadership, over investment in universities, I don't know. There may be divisions around this strategy too, as there are, for instance, in the United States. But the capacity for public sector change sort of stimulated by public sector investment is a dramatic example.
Over to Jada.
Firstly, I just want to thank you, Professor Connell, specifically for your to-do list. I think it's very easy for a learned scholar to criticize something and not offer something of an alternative, especially a realistic alternative. So I thank you for that. But on that to-do list, that emphasize reform and even to a certain degree decolonizing the gender. However, I feel the way we frame the idea of the university, so to speak, still feels very rooted in the Western world, like Bologna, Oxford, Paris, the US, for examples. I feel like they dominate the narrative. When centuries earlier, Fatima al-Fihri founded Al-Qawariyyin in Morocco, alongside institutions like Baghdad's House of Wisdom and Al-Azhar in Cairo, among many others, thriving pluralistic senses of learning long before Europe adopted the model. If we define the idea of the university only through its European evolution, aren't we making essentially a Eurocentric argument about Eurocentrism? And instead of just abolishing or reforming universities, should we also be reclaiming and reimagining these pre-colonial models of knowledge as examples?
I think, for instance, we should be learning from examples like Al-Azhar in Egypt, which was based on one of the oldest higher education institutions in the world, which became, in fact, perhaps the leading theological centre of Sunni Islam anywhere in the world, and which after Egyptian independence was achieved in the 1950s, was, so to speak, connected up to the secular university system, and producing institutions. Now I think one of the biggest universities in the world, which I believe attempts both to keep alive the higher education traditions of the mosque that around which the whole university was originally based, and combine that with the kind of curriculum that we see in this country, and which I think is not, which I would argue is not so much a Western curriculum or a Western model of knowledge, but an imperial one, because the sciences, when I mentioned that the expansion of colonial universities occurred at the same time as the growth of research-based knowledge formation, I had in mind that the world of knowledge that we live in is international and is marked by a profound set of inequalities, including divisions of labour, where most of the authority, the capacity to establish what counts as theory or relevant concepts, is institutionally located in the universities of the global north. But a whole lot of the data on which the disciplines have been created, and which is still important for enterprise climate science, actually comes from the rest of the world. So over the last few hundred years, there's been an enormous appropriation of knowledge, in effect, by the old institutions of the imperial centre. And that, it seems to me, is exactly the case for decolonising that knowledge formation, for recognising the intellectual traditions and capacities of the rest of the majority world, and restructuring curriculum in the light of that. That's my hope. That will be a practical proposition.
Over to Marley for the final question.
Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask about like the integration of the university with sort of the military industrial complex. And so it seems like today the Western universities basically have as their necessary counterpart, like the ongoing scholasticide and genocide in Gaza. Like not in, like in terms of investment portfolios, but research partnerships, and also just like the political position that sort of the administration has taken to the opposition that staff and students have had to that. And so I guess my question is like, to what extent do you see this integration as sort of like a complementary part of this process you're talking about, sort of like the neoliberalization of the university, or should we just kind of see it as like a continuation of that imperial function that like Western universities have always played?
Bit of both, for sure. I just don't know. I can't read. You will probably know a lot more than I do about the economics of Western universities' involvement in the Middle East more generally. I know that quite a number of North American, European, and to some extent Australian universities have become involved in creating overseas campuses, some of them in the Gulf states, some in centres like Singapore, which then become part of their regular operations and their outreach, and cultural things as we agree, and might see it. That seems to be, I mean, that is not a large proportion of the funding of the global university system as a whole, but it's a culturally visible part, and it may, therefore, would be really quite important. It will questions, if you like. In the extent to which university-based research and also teaching has been integrated with the military industrial complex, with the military purposes of Western states, of imperial states. And there's no doubt, for instance, that the discipline of anthropology, was very deeply interwoven with the imperial projects of France and Britain, especially. There's no doubt. There was a huge surge in military funding in the United States, which was crucial to the expansion of American universities in the 1950s and 60s. And, I've had, that connection. It's an emotional subject for me because my political formation was in the struggle against the American and Australian war in Vietnam. But I remember that one of the features of the American draft system, which produced the soldiers in Santa Claus, and produced the massacres that happened in Vietnam, was the exclusion of university students from the draft. You can get a draft deferment, as it's called, which could usually determine an exemption from call-up for the war. So that at that time, of course, the university system was smaller than this now. It's more privileged. The average student came from more privileged backgrounds, so it's very much a class issue, and of course a race issue. The class and race is so tightly interwoven in the United States. So that's, then things then changed in the funding of research when they became less of the research was going into rockets and hydrogen bombs and so forth. But they changed the legislation in the United States, which allowed universities to commercialize their research. What was it called? I've forgotten the name of the act in the American Congress. Anyway, so at least the elite universities, which did biomedical research and engineering research, began to shift towards commercial, commodifiable research outputs, patents, basically. And if you look at the statistics of that, there's stunning inequalities among American universities in their income from patents, and between disciplines too. Because the political economy doesn't have patents.
Don't tell anyone. Wonderful. Thank you so much to our students for that really great discussion. That is all we have time for tonight, but I'm sure there's plenty to keep talking about, and we can do that if anyone wants to in the pub. So the Political Economy Student Society has booked a space in the back room of the Forest Lodge Hotel just across the road. They've asked me to let students here know if you'd like a group of people to walk over with. Members of the Political Economy Society, led by Declan over here, are going to be waiting just out the courtyard outside of this building in the courtyard under the Garabara artwork. So you can walk over with a group of students if you want. So before we finish, I just need to say a bunch of thank yous to various people. So firstly, thanks to Professor Wahidin and also the School of Social and Political Sciences, who have generously supported tonight's lecture, including the drinks and catering before the lecture as part of the Social Sciences Week events. I want to thank Catherine Hines, Tom Wesley, Amy Neville, and all of the SSPS professional staff who've gone to lots of work in organising tonight's event. I want to thank the student panel, so Jada, Marley, Ruby and Cindy for the excellent questions and discussion. I'll just give this to Azri to hand over to Raewyn. So of course we want to thank our wonderful speaker for tonight for a really brilliant, thought-provoking, memorable and politically significant lecture. So thank you very much, Raewyn, for tonight.
So thank you to Raewyn on behalf of SSPS and all of you for joining us today. This evening has been an absolute success, and you have given us all ideas to go away and think about what a good university should look like. So once again, can we put our hands together for Raewyn Connell and the panel?
And my last thank you is to all of you. Thank you so much for coming, especially those of you who come every single year for the gathering of the PE community. Hopefully we can put on some better weather for you next year, but we really appreciate you coming. And just a very, very final thing, I just want to draw everyone's attention to our plans for a celebration event for the Political Economy 50th anniversary. We're looking to reach out to as many alumni as possible in particular. So if that's you, please register your details through the QR code on the screen, and we'll send out information about that event in the next week or two. So that's it from me. Thanks everybody, and see you next year.